welcome back to the Freedom Families podcast. Today we are talking about something that every single person, whether you are a parent, a grandparent, or neither, should be thinking about. And I'm excited to introduce to you our guest, Stacy Manning. Stacy Manning co-authored the book Them Before Us with Katie Faust, and she is also deeply involved in the organization by the same name, Them Before Us. Welcome, Stacy.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
So you guys, you and Katie, you've been working on Them Before Us and these topics for about 8 or 9 years. Is that correct?
You know, we've been blogging together for about 8 or 9 years, and it's a funny adventure because we were first blogging about same-sex marriage and our fears that changing the definition of parenthood or that changing the definition of marriage would inevitably change the definition of parenthood, which of course it has. And it was through those years of blogging and debating and discussing and really fleshing out our thoughts on the matter that we realized, oh, we're talking about children's rights. This is a huge umbrella, and so many of society's ills fall under the need to respect and acknowledge and champion and cherish the rights of children to be known and loved by their mother and father.
And did you guys find each other by blogging, or were you friends to begin with? How did you find each other?
We became friends when she and her husband moved to our church, and her husband became the senior pastor. And we were fast friends. But the writing is funny. It's actually we both believe it's very God ordained. When she came home from a vacation, she was just on fire, tired of being quiet, tired of hearing every day on NPR. I cured her of listening to that quickly after. But every day there was only one motivation that anyone would choose to oppose redefining marriage, and that was because of bigotry and hatred, which is small, narrow, and ignorant thinking.
And a quick way to shut down any discussion at all.
You bet, because you're a troglodyte. It's about love. It's all about the love, and it's not all about the love. Kids need a whole lot more than just two adults loving one another and loving them. But rewind. When she came home, she was just on fire at a Barnabas group that we have. A group of ladies get together. We discuss life issues. And while Katie usually facilitates, this night she was just like tears. It was a very, okay, let's just give the woman some space, right? And I thought to myself, as she was saying, I can't write. I don't have the words. I know God wants me to do this, but God, I need an Aaron. Yeah. And I was thinking, I could totally help her on that. And so I went home and I tucked my baby girl in. It was very late, an unusually late night. And what was on her radio but the story of Moses and Aaron from a many years past vacation Bible school. And I thought, okay, I love you, God. You have a sense of humor. Roger that. And I contacted her the next day. I'm like, I would say to somebody else that you won't believe what just happened, but you'll totally believe what happened. And she said, I was hoping you would, but I just didn't want to ask because I wanted God to tell you. So then we began writing on these issues, and really, working together well, developing our skills. We're just a couple of stay-at-home moms, think the same way about these issues, and really are an illustration of how it's going to take 2, 5, 20, a million moms and dads out there fighting this battle on a grassroots level and changing hearts and minds in our living rooms and coffee stores and workplaces.
I know that Katie's talked about how nerve-wracking how nerve-wracking it was, and how, her words, she was a chicken at first to have these discussions, because as you mentioned, if you bring up any sort of, not even a condemning, but just a questioning of same-sex marriage, of IVF, of commercial surrogacy, any of those things, you are labeled all of these very horrible terms like bigot and homophobe and transphobe and all these things, right? Instead of being able to have discussions about, well, where are the kids in this discussion? How do
Mhm.
these things affect the kids? And I think that it's really important for us to talk about how this is not just conjecture, but you guys have looked at the data, you've done the research, and tell us, where has this sexual revolution, well, first let's go to where it started with
Yeah.
no fault divorce.
Yes. Yeah, the church really lost the gay marriage battle the moment they capitulated. We capitulated on no fault divorce, or divorce at all, frankly. Um, when when we don't take the seriousness and the reason for government to be involved in marriage relationships at all seriously, um, the foundation begins to crumble. And that's the truth. The truth of the matter is that government should only be involved in marriages because they beget the next generation of taxpayers. When it becomes about the endorsement or oh celebration of adult emotion and feelings, then we inevitably sacrifice the rights of a child on the altar of adult desire. And every story you read, whether it's the celebration of a child that a celebrity has manufactured to satisfy their need to be a parent, or the celebration of adopting children from all over the country without any real exploration of the true baggage that comes from a child that has to be adopted. We've done such a disservice focusing on only the adults that we are raising kids that are essentially being gaslit by our culture, um, when the real true feelings of, hey, adoption, I got a lot of hurt, or surrogacy, wow, I was wanted so much and there's no place for me to tell my story because I'm indicting my own parent when I talk about the hurt that they chose for me to experience through a lifetime because they wanted a child so desperately. Um,
Mhm.
and that's the reason that we really lost in the whole redefinition of marriage argument, because we didn't have any stories. They had lots of stories and they had lots of personal testimony of how it's, I love my two moms. Um, and I'm sure that's true. And I don't blame the kids on our side, let's say, for lack of a better term, because I think we're all on the same side. We just don't know. A
Yeah.
lot of people just haven't thought about these things thoroughly. Um, the stories of hurt and loss and anguish are costly because, like I was saying, they're indicting the very people that are supposed to care about and cherish them the most.
On that point, can you talk to us about how you can hold that the best place for a child is with their biological mother and father, while also loving and respecting and living with those who choose to be in a same sex union?
Um, that's a difficult and easy question to answer, and I love that. That comes down to what's your role. Um, when you are involved in government and forwarding policy, when you are a policy maker and you are trying to affect the best policy, which should protect and endorse the most optimal place for children to be raised, that's where that's where to have the fight, right? When you are in a relationship, your sister desperately wants to have a baby and thinks that maybe surrogacy or IVF is her only route. That's not the place to have that fight. That's the place to be loving and nurturing and only provide your opinion when asked, and and pray for the opportunity to have that conversation. And if you do have that conversation, kind and gentle, and all the studies and all the testimonies that we have in our book will hopefully help you to make a case and say, you know, you could be the most amazing mother, father, but in no way can you be the opposite sex parent. In no way is it, ethical to choose for a child on purpose to not grow up with their biological mother and father. We, as a just society, we we rescue orphans. We don't manufacture them.
Right. And you guys are very good at stating that your mission is that we as adults should be putting the children's rights before our desires. But
Hmm.
you also used a word that's very important, and you used intentional. So let's talk about how there are certain times where the situation is that a child is going to be adopted because they have no ability to be with their biological mother and father. And that's a much different situation than, as you said, intentionally depriving a child of either its mother or father.
Yes, yes, and a lot of people don't really draw the distinction there, but I think it's a really easy distinction to draw. Adoption mends brokenness. It is the best possible way to for society to attempt to right a, a, a horrible wrong. A child whose parents are unwilling or unable to parent them, that's a tragedy that everyone acknowledges as a terrible, terrible thing. And that child will grow up in a home, assuming everything has been done properly, and all of the studies and the background checks. And I mean, adoption is a very vetted process, obviously.
Mhm.
um, that the child will grow up in a home with parents who are willing and ready to walk through that that process of dealing with the loss of one's mother and father. That is entirely absent in a home where surrogacy has taken place, or well, yeah, I get it would be surrogacy regardless. When there's been purchasing of gametes and a child has been made, that child is growing up in the exact opposite environment of the adopted child. The parents in the adoption uh, are intending to mend. The parents in the surrogacy situation are responsible for severing. The mentality around adoption and surrogacy, because they really are kind of like two opposite sides of the coin, kind of, um, is that not everyone has a right to adopt, but
Mhm.
every child has a right to be adopted.
Right. It's I think that's incredibly important to have that distinction, that adoption is for the betterment of the child, to mend, as you said, that a
Right.
child has a right to be cared for, to be loved, to be safe. But we as adults, we don't have the right
Nope.
to have a child or
Nope.
have the right to adopt a child. And I think that's
That's
an
right.
extremely important distinction that we don't talk about nearly enough.
Hmm.
What do you say to those who talk about how, and I'm sure you get this a lot, Well, doesn't a child just need to be cared for and loved, regardless of whether that is a single parent, same-sex parents, a grandmother? As long as they're loving adults, why does it matter?
Yeah, a child needs a biological connection. They often experience genealogical bewilderment. It's the industry term for children who feel utterly detached and commodified as a result of their origin. So many stories that we have talk about this primal wound, this deep-seated need and longing for the absent parent that these children experience. It is not only on a bare bones, a child needs the complementary mother and father um, for optimal development. They need connection. They need to know where they've come from and understand how important it is they understand on a primal level that who their father is, who their mother is, where they got that nose, their personality, their laugh. It gives them a feeling of belonging. Um, so many of the stories are that we have in our book are shocking. Like, I always knew there was something wrong. I always knew that. Gosh, we never really jived. I never really fit in. Or how dare they just tell me my uncle was my uncle when he was so clearly my father? Um, and also, um, as an aside, the darker part, there's so many dark parts, but the darker part of like, say, the purchasing of gametes and using the fertility industry, it totally takes away the pheromone, the assessment, the interaction that two human beings would have to even consider whether you would be a good match.
Mm.
Genetically. There's one of the gentlemen that we feature, one of his stories. His mother shopped for sperm at what was used to be referred to as the genius sperm bank, and they very specifically only took sperm from very high IQ, and they would only implant the sperm in very
Oh.
high IQ women. And
Mhm.
this gentleman donated numerous times, has 100 offspring, and was also schizophrenic.
Mm.
Now, that's something that all of these women likely would have assessed, and just on a base level thought, yeah, you're not, we're not a match, and
Yeah.
having a child with you is probably not the best idea.
Mhm.
But the IVF and the gamete selling and big fertility really sanitizes that whole process.
And along with kind of the darker side, I wanted to mention this earlier when you were talking about it, but the frozen embryos that
Ugh,
stay frozen, those are human beings, and that is certainly a very dark side and an ethical issue that has been largely swept under the rug for, again, adult desires.
that is a tragedy, and uh, I, I can totally understand, um, knowing how desperately I wanted to become a mother, that people dive into fertility treatments and embryos probably without thinking really deeply about the ramifications. Big fertility has no interest in, you know,
Certainly.
selling the downsides and telling the
Yeah.
truth.
Mhm.
Uh, but I just can't imagine what it must be like to be a family that successfully had a baby through these technologies, and to know that there are brothers and sisters of their child that's sitting at the breakfast table in freezers,
Mhm.
and that the only difference between the child at the table and the freezer children is time.
And a
Those are the
choice, right? And a
those are
choice.
the and a choice. That's
Yeah.
right. And those are their children. And to have to decide what to do with human beings. Oh,
Our technology is rapidly outpacing our ethical discussions. That certainly is the case. But even if we go back, as we talked about no fault divorce, that I don't know offhand what year that was. Do you know offhand?
I
No
think it
fault.
was 1970,
Okay.
I think. Yeah.
So when you know these issues are there are more and more issues piling on, but the issues in general revolving around children's rights and how we should be curbing the discussion toward what
Mhm.
children need, as well as children's rights versus just wanting adults' desires and whatever an adult wants as long as they're loving, right? Um,
Yeah.
which isn't always the case either. But when we go back to no fault divorce, we know it's largely known that divorce is hard on kids, but the divorce itself, let's say it happens in a particular month of a particular year, that is not the only it's a ripple effect. That's
Mhm.
not the only difficulty for those children to get through, and once you're through that month or through that year, then the children just go back to being, you know, good and well-being is good and whole just as if it were before the divorce.
Yeah, it's referred to as an adverse childhood experience, and it very often is just the beginning of a myriad adverse childhood experiences. Children end up being cut and pasted into new families. Uh, they sometimes have to experience a revolving door of spouses, boyfriends, and unfortunately, the most dangerous person in a child's life is an unrelated adult living with them in their home. I mean, uh, take an internet search of mother's boyfriend, and you will get page after page of horrific stories about children being abused by the unrelated male in the home. And of course, that's not related to, or that's not limited to males. The statistics on even step parents, how much they're willing to spend on education after high school, medical needs, and even food. Uh,
Mhm.
Statistically, they are stingy. They're stingy with kids that they are not biologically related to. And that's this is just this is just humanity, right? Uh, these are natural things that we are born with. These are our natural inclinations of investing in sacrificing more for our offspring. And no matter how grody or unattractive you might think that kind of outcome is, this is just the nature of human beings, and we need to acknowledge and respect that this is the reality. So um, working from a place of like, you get divorced and you're handing your kids a big sack of interpersonal garbage that you as an adult were probably responsible for creating and are choosing not to solve. So now your kids are going to live out of a backpack. They're going to shuttle from house to house. They're going to have two sets of rules. The earth is essentially removed from beneath them. You have you are destroying any foundation and feeling of safety that they thought they had, um, because it's hard. Well, yeah, you know what? It is hard. And it is for adults to do the hard things in this life so that our children don't have to. It's not about your feelings. Your feelings are not more important than the well-being of your kids. And if you want happy feelings as you watch your babies grow up and launch and have a successful family, then you need to invest and do the work in your marriage so that you don't have to suffer for the rest of your life with the pain of watching your kids likely repeat the same mistakes that you did. Children of, oh my gosh, I wish I had the statistic right in front of me, but children whose parents divorce and remarry, they are more likely to divorce themselves versus children's parents who simply divorce.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I would have assumed
Huh.
that you were just gonna say, children who have parents who divorced are more likely to divorce than having parents who did not divorce. But that's really interesting. I
I
also
thought so
wonder
too.
I wonder what the implications are now as cohabitation is skyrocketing and the amount of people who don't get married at all, but
Yeah.
they have children and possibly stay with the biological parent of that child for a long time, but it seems like to me, maybe you guys have found this in your research, but it doesn't seem like cohabitation has the brevity or the strength that marriage does.
No, it doesn't. Cohabiting couples are more likely to dissolve. They are less. One researcher referred to it as kind of falling into parenthood. It's kind of a, oh well, we're pregnant now because we moved in together, and we have to pay this Peloton off, and we
Yeah.
love, we love the bulldog, right? So,
Uh-huh.
well, I guess, and then babies come along because sex makes babies.
Yeah.
That is what it's intended to do.
And people
Um,
people aren't living together and not having sex. That's not happening.
that's right. That's right. And the cohabiting couple falls into parenthood, you're not dealing with people that you're not dealing with another individual who is really mindful and intentional about planning the future. You have a couple that chooses to get married. That's a very intentional thing to do. That couple is often more likely to make plans about, is there a parent who's going to stay at home? How are we going to deal with the inevitable children that come from this marriage? Because I think we still have a cultural understanding that marriage is intended uh, to produce children. Cohabiting,
Right,
well,
right.
friends with friends with benefits, right?
And at least coming from somebody who's still in their 20s, it feels like cohabitating is the norm. And largely, if you are to say that you believe you shouldn't live together until you're married, that is almost slowly moving into the same category as saying that you believe a child should have access to both their biological mother and father in the same home.
Yes, I I find it fascinating that our cultural influencers, our cultural leaders, they they sure do make a lot of material, entertainment material that would support just kind of do what feels good, and hey, let's just move in together, or um, they cater to that. Well, the kids will be fine. All of the very very wrong things. Yet, if you look at their own behavior, they marry.
So, I'm sure you get this a lot, but what do you say when people ask you about whether you have parents who want to get a divorce, they don't have a good relationship, it's a toxic relationship, that can't be good for the kids. Wouldn't it be better for them to get divorced?
Uh, Statistically, most divorces are initiated by women in low conflict marriages. Um, the in no way should a person remain in a marriage that is abusive to the spouse or the children. I mean, I don't think you need to go any further on a point like that. Of course, if there's abuse in the home, then your duty is to protect the children. The same way that your duty is to protect the children by nurturing and fixing the marriage that you have chosen to enter as an adult, that you have chosen to bring children into. Your desire is not nearly as important as your children's needs and rights. And maybe you had a misunderstanding of what marriage is and what adulting in this manner would require of you. And that's on you, because you're the adult with the fully formed brain and hopefully the emotional intelligence to, yes, stick it out for the children. And most often, there was a study, most often, people that wanted to divorce, that remained divorced, that remained married, in 5 years, their marriage had improved. They were better off, spiritually, emotionally. The people that went ahead and divorced reported not to be better off. It only creates another huge nest of problems. You're in a marriage, you know what the problems are. You need to work on the known quantity problems. Guaranteed, a divorce will create another huge set of problems. So not only do you teach your kids that, yeah, you know what, it got hard, so you guys are going to have to do the work of maintaining a relationship with your mother or father, but now we've introduced statistically the most dangerous people potentially in your lives. We've ripped asunder all of these familial contacts. You have 2 Christmases, you have 2 Easters, you don't feel safe. We have taught you to give up. There's a million reasons to just put your big kid pants on and, like all the kids like to say these days, do the work.
Another question I'm sure you get a lot is, well, wouldn't it be better for if we go back to same-sex couples and specifically on adopting, would it not be better for a child to be adopted by a same-sex couple than stay in an orphanage or throughout the foster care system?
100%. Yes. The difference is that they should not be the priority couple. The priority should be a mother and a father household. The only reason that a same-sex couple would be prioritized is political virtue signaling. If in a situation where a social worker professional has assessed that a same-sex headed household would be an appropriate fit for a child, and it is all about what the needs of the child are, then of course they should be placed in a same-sex headed household. Yes, children need love. And between an institution and a lesbian couple, if that's what's available, then of course.
So what is the difference from the stories you've heard and the research you've done? Because I think a lot of people would say that there is no difference between 2 men or 2 women who are loving parents versus having 1 man and 1 woman who are loving parents. If they're all
Yeah,
loving and good people, what's the difference?
yeah. The difference is what the kids report when they are not self-selected. The study that is the no difference study is simply not true. When the research was really done on families that were randomly selected, the kids are not faring as well in any way when they come from a same-sex headed household. The studies that report no difference would have they were self-selected from upper income parent groups that told their friends about the study, and they knew well that the results of this study would likely forward their political desires. And so, of course, and they were self-reported. So it's the adults saying that, oh, my kid, is so
Yeah,
great.
right.
It should have better been called a study that said homosexual couples are not as honest about their parenting fails as heterosexual couples, because that's really about the only thing that it proved out. And many of these studies, there was another study in Italy that was just as egregious. Like, wow, no kids are faring as well as these parents said that they were faring. None. The no difference thing is a lie. And Mark Regner, oh my gosh, I can't pronounce his name.
Ignoramus.
Thank you. Yes. He did the mother of all studies. He mined through the census data and came up with a truly random sampling. And the outcomes for kids are not good. It's just a fact.
I am aware. I've read the studies and that show that it is very clear that the way that you can most stack the deck in favor of a child's current and future well-being, whether it's physical, emotional, intellectual, career-wise, all of those things, is to have a biological mother and father in the home.
Yes, and there's a study. I was listening to the author, and I have to go back and find it, but I thought it was just amazing. He was pretty self-deprecating about it because he has great kids, as he reported, and he said in this longitudinal study of outcome for children, what disappointed me, but was too obvious to ignore, is that you can't really improve on your kids by really great parenting. You can't really improve on them by good parenting. You can't even really improve on them by just kind of, phoning it in. You can damage them profoundly. You have all the power to destroy them. But just being there, invested, loving them, no matter how many parenting books you read, no matter all the rage, the showing up and raising them is really what matters.
Well, I am super grateful that we had you on, and I want you to point us toward where our listeners can learn more, can read more, listen more, get involved if they want to get involved, because you guys are standing up for kids. You're one of the only voices out there that is distinctly standing up for children, and I want to make sure that our listeners know where to go for more.
Yes, thembeforeus.com is where you will find places to get newsletters, read stories, submit your own story. If this speaks to you and you want to tell someone, we are open for business, and we would love to hear from you. You can buy our book, Them Before Us, Why the World Needs a Global Children's Rights Movement, from Amazon or christianbooks.com, Target, all the places, Them Before Us. You can also read our book and arm yourself with as much information as we could gather, and hopefully well-made points, illustrations, studies, and stories to help you make the case in your own life. There's nothing hateful or bigoted about championing the rights of a child to be known and loved by his mother and father. That's not against anyone. It is the very thing that will curb teen pregnancy, depression, anxiety, drug addiction, divorces. When we see to the needs of our children, and I think many of you know that, and you might not know the words or have really landed on exactly why you think the way that you think. And it's our hope that in our manual, which is essentially what it is, you will find the words and you will be girded by truth and take it out into your own community and have these conversations, knowing that you are coming from a place of love. And sometimes love is rough. And sometimes, even if the person you're speaking to you think would make the most amazing mother. Parenthood is sacrifice, and maybe sacrificing parenthood itself is the greatest thing that person can do. I think I'll just leave it right there.
Yeah, no, that was good. Thank you. And I'm so glad that I got to have you on. And if you think of that, you were talking about a book or a study that you couldn't think of. But if you think of it, you should send it to me because I am interested in
I'm
hearing.
still digging for it. I will be happy to share it with you. Yes.
Okay, great. Well, you have a great rest of your day, and thank you. Bye.
Bye.